911, where's your emergency?
There's a man outside that's wrecked his truck, and he all bloody, and I can't get him up.
His blue jeans had soaked up so much blood they had turned red.
It painted a very different picture of what may have taken place.
Tell me how I died.
I was notified that there was a deceased person on scene at an apartment building on McGuffey.
As a coroner investigator, we are the eyes and ears for the forensic pathologist. Upon walking up into the parking lot, we could see the truck into the fence line and the deceased hanging out of the passenger side seat with the door open. Searching around the body, I see a gunshot wound on the right thigh, and the handgun was underneath.
We did locate some items about 15 feet to the rear of the vehicle. Those items included a set of keys, a cigarette lighter, a tire iron, and a small spot of blood on the ground.
And it kind of appeared that the truck had either coasted or was driven from that location to where it came to rest after striking the fence.
I just happened to look in the back of the truck and noticed a casing. What the casing in the bed of the truck told me was that our victim was outside of his vehicle, to the rear and to the left of the vehicle. Because the casings in most modern semi-automatic handguns will eject to the right and usually forward of the shooter. This made me believe that whatever gunplay happened outside of the vehicle and before he entered it. Personal items from his pockets were removed and placed on the sheet next to him and photographed. Among those things was a credit card with the name William Rios.
The day that they had found William, I started getting a phone call on Snapchat and on Facebook, and it ended up being one of my friends, and she was crying and saying that William had been killed, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was like, they just found William at the apartments and he had been shot. It was very hard to tell my kids. My daughter took it really bad.
Among the things that we recovered from William's body were jewelry, cash, and what we believe to be bags of narcotics. This was not likely a robbery.
So at this point, we took samples of the blood inside the truck.
The DNA sampling from the inside of the vehicle indicated that there had been another person inside. At this point, we have to speak with William's next of kin and relatives to find out what they knew about his whereabouts and what he had been involved in the recent past.
I told the cops about 3 months before he died. I came home from work one day and William was home, and Dave Harrella was in the basement. William told me that they were childhood friends and Dave had no water. So William was trying to help him out with letting him use the shower. David Harrella was supposed to stay only one night, and he ended up staying like a month. I noticed William starting to change after David being there. Before all this, William was always in the garage or out in the yard playing with the kids and the dog. And then when David started coming around, William just slowly started wanting to sleep all day, not wanting to get up and play with the kids. As it got worse, I started thinking like that him and Dave were doing some type of drugs in the basement. That's when I said David had to go, and if William continued to hang out with David, that he couldn't be in the house either anymore.
There was a laceration in that femoral artery of the right leg of Mr. Rios. So it tore the blood vessel. Blood could freely escape. That's a life-threatening wound. Within minutes, you can lose a critical amount of blood. So I determined the cause of death for Mr. Rios to be a gunshot wound of his right leg. After dissecting the gunshot wound of the leg for Mr. Rios, I was able to see there was a recent gunshot wound to one of his flanks. and healing abrasions that would be consistent with recent injuries.
I was able to determine that was from a previous assault a few weeks prior. Seeing that in his medical records was very interesting because it led me to, again, what happened? Did someone assault him again? Did someone find him again? What was this?
One night, while I was actually getting ready for bed, I had received a phone call from a friend of mine, and she was explaining to me that Dave had seen William at a red light, and Dave shot him. I asked my friend why David would have shot William, and she said that they were actually in an argument, and they have been fighting with each other the last month.
Unfortunately, Mr. Havrilla was basically off the grid at this point, kind of leading us down the path of suspicion that why isn't this individual making himself available for questioning? Did he potentially have something to do with this death?
In regards to the toxicology report, there were a number of illicit substances that were detected. The toxicology report, it's absolutely needed for the manner of death. In the case of Mr. Rios, the presence of a gun and illicit drug use, which of course alters coordination in addition to other physiologic effects. Those substances in themselves alter my thinking. And the way I look at it is that they are risk factors for an accident happening.
I did have an opportunity to speak by phone with Rios' brother. And this man told me that Rios had become paranoid over the last month since the original shooting with David Havrilla, and had taken to wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a gun most of the time.
We got additional information that Mr. Rios became increasingly paranoid about death threats. He was worried that somebody had it out for him.
The DNA results of swabs taken from the truck, steering wheel, and driver's side door did show the presence of another person who had been inside the truck, but it was determined that that sample was so old that it likely had nothing to do with the Rios shooting. And then the DNA comes back for the gun involved in this incident. And the results were that Rios, and only Rios' DNA, was on the casing. The DNA found on the casing means that Rios loaded that weapon. But there's the possibility that somebody else could have shot Rios and then wiped the gun down to get rid of their DNA. So this is still treated as a homicide. We received the results of the ballistics testing in the case, and we learned that both the bullet from Rios' leg and the casing that we found in the bed of the truck were ejected from the firearm that was found inside the truck, which means David Havrilla is not the suspect in the case.
We also learned that only one shot was fired from that gun into Mr. Rios' leg at close range.
This was not a homicide. Rios is the only one who could have shot Rios.
For the case of Mr. Rios, I know that the gunshot wound was not at the hands of someone else, so we need to determine whether it was accident or suicide. To intentionally aim, shoot yourself in the leg, you can hit your femoral artery. I don't think that's very common. The range of fire, the presence of the firearm in the vehicle, illicit drug use, all of our information supports accident as opposed to suicide.
I'm thinking what happened was he was outside of his truck with his firearm in his hand.
We see the keys were dropped. If Mr. Rios had bent down to get the keys and he had his firearm close to him or in his waist, particularly in his inebriated state, the gun would have went off. The shell casing at that point would have ejected to the right, which would have landed directly into the back of the pickup truck.
That's why we have blood outside and a casing in the bed. Rios knew right away he was in trouble because there was a lot of blood really fast, so he hops in the truck and tries to make it out of there. And he doesn't make the turn and hits his fence. Probably one of the last things he was thinking about was he was in trouble and had to get to a hospital and attempted to do so.
Based on the pattern of the blood that we see, it appears that he was trying to make his way over into the passenger seat.
He was probably within minutes, if even that long. He completely bled out through that large hole in his femoral artery. And that's where we find him, laying across the front seat of the truck.
When I saw him, they put accidental on the death certificate. Even if David didn't shoot him, I do believe David had something to do with William's death in some way.